Welcome, everybody. It's episode 8. Hello, Chris.
Hey there.
My name is MJ. That is Chris. We are accomplished academics. We have 50 books on our CV, 30,000 articles, 50,000 conference contributions. We've worked at 70 universities. We're demanded around the world, and we're here. Wait.
I will have one conference next month in Illinois, and a publication about the same month. So,
Chris,
yeah.
we're awesome. So basically, what I'm trying to say is we have authority, and everything we're about to say is completely veridical, just by virtue of our authority. Just kidding, I'm MJ. That's Chris. Welcome. Sorry for that intro. Today, we're going to be going over an essay, this one to be exact, in defense of non-natural, non-theistic moral realism. Chris, have you ever heard of the moral argument for God's existence?
I'd hope so. Like right during my master's thesis defense, they just asked me that question, and I'm like, "What? What's that?" I get put it out of the room. No. That's a good name though. Non-natural, non-theistic moral realism. They should change robust realism to that.
That is a mouthful.
Yeah,
Non-natural,
yeah,
non-theistic moral realism.
yeah. This is kind of in the middle of a conversation between Wielenberg um, and I'm trying to remember actually the other person's name. Why do I always forget his name? Is it's always the same. I only forget like his name when it comes to all the people that I've read. Uh,
Um, who?
this is the second paper.
Oh,
He's talking about somebody. This is his first paper on this. So it's his response. It's basically kind of a somewhat a response to William Wainwright.
William Wainwright.
Yeah. And Wainwright responds to him, and the title of the paper is called "In Defense of Non-Natural Theistic Realism."
Oh, good comeback.
Right. So, and it's kind of important too because robust realism doesn't have to be, so far as I can tell, it doesn't have to be non-theistic. It really doesn't. Like I don't see why it would have to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's just that things like, say, moral propositions should be understood robust realistically, as David Enoch put it, and you can do that if you're a theist. Maybe because someone might say, well, it's because you'd have to understand moral properties that way. Okay, now that might be something against, say, maybe various forms of Christian theism that think that God, say, is the good, or that God is more intimately connected with the good in some way, rather than just having the property of goodness. So yeah, I've never seen like a knockdown argument, which are rare anyway, for why robust realism has to be non-theistic.
It has to be.
Yeah.
It has to be.
Uh,
So, flyover time. So basically, what Willenberg's trying to do here, and I brought up the moral argument for a reason because I knew about that first. The moral argument, typically, the deductive version. We'll get into Baggett and Walls, Waggett and Balls later,
yeah.
as far as their abductive version. But the deductive version, everybody probably already knows that, is premise one: objective moral values exist only if God exists. Premise two: objective moral values exist, and conclusion: therefore God exists. Basically, what Willenberg's essay does here, uh, non natural, non theistic moral realism, he'll agree with premise two that objective moral values exist,
Yep.
but he's going to disagree with premise one that objective moral values exist only if God exists. And then we brought that up. He defines what he means by all these terms here. In particular, he brings up non-theistic right here. I don't mean to imply that the view entails atheism. The view is compatible with theism as well as atheism, but it does not. But it does imply that there are objective ethical facts, even if atheism is true. And then we brought
Mm-hmm.
up before Richard Swinburne, who doesn't think that objective moral values exist only if God exists.
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually a view that Swinburne could endorse. Swinburne, for those of you who don't know, he's a philosopher of religion at Oxford, I think, or Cambridge. Dang it.
I can't
I
remember.
mixed those two
Yeah.
up. He's
Yeah.
one of the best Christian philosophers of religion out there, but he doesn't think that objective moral values exist only if God exists. So this could be a kind of view that he holds. He doesn't necessarily hold it, but he could hold it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And basically, what this view, or Wielenberg's version of this view, is going to say is that you have these objective ethical facts. You ought not to rape people, Chris. Okay? You ought not to steal. You ought not to murder. You ought
Yeah.
not to covet your neighbor's wife.
Yeah.
You ought not
Yeah.
to do a variety of different things. And the reason why that's the case is because those non-natural, normative, ethical slash moral facts, I guess he says in this essay, they're metaphysically entailed by, or caused by, or maybe in this essay he says, or later in his book he says supervenient on, and he cashes out different kinds of supervenience, natural facts.
Right.
And,
He focuses on states of affairs in this paper.
States of affairs and properties.
And
right.
the funny thing is, he changes. I don't know if I think he still thinks that states of affairs exist, but he talks about them a lot less in his book Robust Realism. And his version of Robust Realism, he tailors. In fact, a lot of Robust Realists tailor their Robust Realism after David Enoch's version, which seems to be like kind of the standard today. And David Enoch's version doesn't seem to be specifically, anti-theistic or atheistic or anything.
Just non-theistic.
And not even necessarily so. You could make it theistic. It's not really that hard, but it's actually a lot harder when you go to Wielenberg's version. His, I've argued before, isn't simply non-theistic. That's what he says, but I don't think it is. I think it must be godless. Like his preferred term for it is godless normative realism.
Godless normative realism, right?
Yeah, it's godless, not even just non-theistic. And it's no accident that his book Robust Realism, the subtitle, is godless normative realism, not non-theistic. Do you remember that?
Yep, I'm going to pull it up right now. Robust Ethics, Wielenberg. Let's see here.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically the point is that there's no accident that the subtitle I think his best book, like the book that really is, it's a really, really good formulation of his Robust Realism. In the subtitle, he cites godless robust normative realism, not non-theistic.
Here it is.
Right.
Metaphysics and epistemology of godless normative realism.
Right.
So this book was published after this essay was published.
Right. This is a little earlier in his thought. He prefers godless normative realism, which has the extra thesis that God does not exist. Now, there's obviously a reason for that, right? And I think actually it's because on his version of robust realism, God doesn't exist, or at least any kind of Anselmian God doesn't exist. And so it's not simply non-theistic. And I mean, there are two quick reasons for that. One is he accepts a version of the principle of causal closure. Like every physical event has a physical cause. Which the universe is kind of a physical event, right? Means it has no physical. It won't have a physical cause, and neither. But it's a physical effect that doesn't have a physical cause. So that violates the principle of causal closure right there. But if you assume it's closed even there, then there's no creator. Right. And any cases in where let's say God does something, say just directly, and there's no physical cause of it. It's a non-physical cause. It's God doing it directly. There are none of those, right? Because it has to have a physical cause, period.
That's why I got confused with whether or not there was a causal relationship between the natural properties and the non-natural normative moral properties.
Right. Yeah. And he thinks there is. Yeah. Well, yeah. it's a combination of the natural features of a certain state of affairs that is the subvenient base of moral properties applying to it.
Yeah.
Right, and it makes it be the case.
It makes it be the case that making
Yeah.
relation
Oh,
is a causal relation.
yeah. That it has or instantiates those moral
Right.
properties, but the moral properties themselves don't cause or get caused by anything. They're just there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, he says, in fact, he says it in two places. He says the foundation of morality is a set of axiomatic necessary ethical truths.
Yes.
No, he says no being, natural or supernatural, is responsible for the truth of or has control over these ethical truths. Right, and so if there are any ethical truths at all, then some of them lie at the very bedrock of reality, created by no one, under no one's control, passing judgment on the actions and character of God and man alike.
Mm-hmm.
The way he says that is not just poetic, right? It's metaphysical.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is literally, on his view, a judge over God, right? That violates the very definition of what God is. Right? It really messes with his sovereignty and his aseity. Right? He's dependent to be who he is on these things. He has to refer to them outside himself. This is part of the ultimacy question and the problem of God and abstract objects. The whole point is his view can't be merely non-theistic. General robust realism can be non-theistic, but his can't. His is too strong for that.
There it is. Godless. Normative realism.
Right.
And I guess he would just, somebody who would, I mean, as far as the implications of this view, if somebody were to subscribe to it, someone like Swinburne, I guess he would just bite the bullet with the Euthyphro dilemma and just say, God commands things because they're right.
Right. Yeah. That's what he. Swinburne has some weird. Yeah. Yes. That's what he'd say. And I don't have like an exhaustive list of like Wielenberg's robust realism, but I've kind of separated into about 7 theses. One would be that I've already mentioned, the principle of causal closure. 2 would be non-natural abstract Platonism. And just for the record, I hate Platonism. 3 would be atheism. Right? Atheism it's godless. It's not just non-theistic. 4 would be de-supervenience, which is his explanation of the relationship between natural and non-natural properties. 5th would be the autonomy thesis, which is basically that people can have the obligation to do whatever, irrespective of whether God commands or wills that people do X. So God's kind of out of the picture on that as well, and on atheism, obviously. 6 is the epiphenomenal thesis, which is that non-natural properties don't have any causal powers. They don't cause anything.
Right. They are caused, but they don't cause.
Yeah. Well, their instantiations are caused. Right. And they just kind of exist out there.
Yep.
In the ether, just sitting floating there.
Floating. Right. We'll get to floating later.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I say that so much that really, if you think about it, to theists, it looks pretty weird when a lot of non-theists do this, because they non-theistic meta-ethicists and just non-theists will kind of take like non-mereological parts of God, separate them all out into their own domains, and so that they explain everything beneath them. Right? They just kind of pick parts out of God, like concepts without conceptualizers, thoughts without thinkers. They take God's character and split it into virtues, that abstract objects like virtues, or truths about God's character that kind of float there. They just kind of split God into all of these conceptual parts and try to explain reality that way, whereas we just combine them into one person. It's just one thing, right? It's not anything really all that new, or not as much as abstract objects are. He's a concrete object. He's an agent, and these things aren't really new to us. Abstract objects are, but we'll probably get to that later about the parsimony of the views. But there's only one last one, is the number 7. The 7th principle is he's an Aristotelian when it comes to right action and intrinsic value. Right, and I'll probably save that because that's going to get too much off track to this paper at the very least.
So yeah, in summary, basically, uh, taking all those seven theses into account and tailoring it to the essay, uh, basically what his view is doing, like what you said, it's taking God out of the picture as far as morality is concerned. So we have these duties, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have values, which he construes in terms of the rights, right, that we have
Mm-hmm. Yep.
as a result of being the kinds of creatures we are as a result of the evolutionary process or something like that. He doesn't think it's deflationary to trace it back to the evolutionary history.
Right.
It just matters what that evolutionary process produced. And it produced the kind of creatures that are self-conscious, feeling, they have intentions, we can express empathy towards certain things. And because we instantiate those kinds of properties, and there's this supervenient or making relation between those properties and the obtainment of particular uh, states of affairs that are the basic metaphysically necessary ethical facts that he's appealing to. That
Mhm.
whole kind of um, system is what grounds the objectivity of moral values and duties. And it's grounded because you have these actually existing abstract states of affairs and abstract properties that just exist. So where we trace the explanation of the objectivity of moral values and duties to God, Wielenberg stops like here at abstracta, at abstractly existing moral states of affairs, basic metaphysically necessary ethical facts, and then the properties um,
Mm-hmm.
that are instantiated in agents like us in relation to these states of affairs. He, we want to say that no, um, not only do we not believe in abstracta, but even if we did, we need to ground it further up. And then further on in the article, Willenberg is going to push back on that move that William Lane Craig and J.P. Moreland and I think William Wainwright got into it a little bit. That
Mm-hmm.
move from, hold on a second, why are we stopping with abstract objects? Don't we need to go further? Why is this the what he calls and what Craig calls the least arbitrary stopping point as far as explanation is concerned? Why do we have to stop at abstracta? And then we'll get into that later. But is that a good summary of kind of
Yeah.
what he's doing
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
compared to what we're trying to do? We
Yeah.
anchor it in God. He anchors it in abstracta.
Yeah. So his view
Right.
is he takes robust realism and then makes it into a version of atheistic moral Platonism.
Yes. Platonism.
Yep. And
And
I hate
Platonism,
Platonism.
yeah, Platonism is the view that you have this infinite collection
Yeah.
of
Right.
abstract objects in the Platonic heaven. This is a view you can trace back to Plato. Socrates talks about it, or Plato uses Socrates as a puppet, where you have all these different little forms and they're called abstract objects. I think the understanding of it changed just a tad with the way
Mm-hmm.
philosophers in the 20th century talked about mathematical objects and stuff like that. But the basic issue is that you have these forms, these objects that exist outside of space and time. They're causally inert, and I guess the only function they have is to ground the objectivity of whatever it is that's in space and time. What's in space and time? Your actual duties. When you help grandma across the street, when you don't steal because you feel a pull on your conscience not to steal. That stuff's concrete. It's in space and time. You're an agent, you're a moral agent operating in space time, trying to morally improve and morally know and blah, 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 blah. But the only reason why there's any objectivity to that is because there's a grounding relation between the properties you instantiate when you do that stuff and the Platonic heaven. So in this case, the good or these states of affairs that, you know, and he actually borrows from Alvin Plantinga a lot because I think even though it might be more accurate to call him a conceptualist, I think he was using a lot of the same terminology that Plantinga used in Plantinga's book, The Nature of Necessity. I saw that in a couple of footnotes
Yeah.
when he was outlining what states of affairs were or what properties were.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Right.
that's a basic overview of his overall strategy, I guess, in the first part of this essay when he's just explaining the view. If I got that right.
Yeah. 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 It's the Platonisms. Yeah. That there's all these objects. Sometimes it's not. It's not even. Most of the time, it's multiple sets of infinities
Yeah, exactly.
of
Yeah.
objects. Many, if not most, of which have members in those sets that exist a se. They're independent of everything else, and they exist in every possible world.
And I got this here. I'm going to read these things real quick just for the audience.
Okay. Yeah.
I like what you. This is Chris's highlighting. Thank you, Chris.
Mm.
Well, first, I guess it's good. He does say right here when he's introducing the basic view, a fundamental category of existing thing is the category of states of affairs. States of affairs are necessarily existing abstract entities that obtain or fail to obtain. So if they fail to obtain, then they just remain up there in the Platonic heaven, right? If they obtain, they're actually true in a world, our world, namely.
Mm-hmm.
And he says facts are obtaining or actual states of affairs. Facts. So that's his definition of facts. They're obtaining or actual states of affairs. Among these, some are contingent, meaning they obtain in some but not all metaphysically possible worlds, or others are necessary, meaning they obtain in all metaphysically possible worlds. So I'm going to scroll down here real quick. He gets into some examples of what that might involve. Yeah, there's Swinburne. Some states of affairs involve ethical properties like moral rightness, moral wrongness, goodness, evil, virtue, vice, and the like. And then these ones. Okay. So here's an example of one ethical state of affairs that Wielenberg is going to bring up that he thinks obtains necessarily. It's wrong to torture the innocent just for fun. And the state of affairs in which pain is intrinsically bad, that is, bad in its own nature or in and of itself, these states of affairs obtain not just in the actual world, but in all metaphysically possible worlds. Other ethical states of affairs hold contingently. For instance, suppose that by pushing a certain button, I would knowingly torture an innocent person just for fun. This means that it is wrong for me to push the button. But this state of affairs holds contingently because there are possible worlds in which my pushing the button would not have such a nefarious result. So he's just narrowing it down on that pushing the button thing. So it's contingently related to a morally nefarious thing. Mm-hmm. So it's not wrong in every world. So this is crucial vocabulary here.
Yeah. In this paper, he focuses a lot on states of the difference between states of affairs and facts.
Yes.
In his robust realism, he seems to change it, but not disagree with it, but focuses more on the proposition and property distinction, right? That a certain set of non-natural properties will, there's the subvenient basis for the instantiation of certain moral properties. And it's true because there's a moral proposition out there that represents it. So you can say there's three levels when it comes to propositions. So there's propositions, states of affairs, which is some conglomeration of propositions, and then possible worlds, which is a maximal and consistent state of affairs.
Or propositions. I heard Plantinga say it's a maximal set of propositions or a maximal set of states of affairs.
Yeah, you could say that either or.
Yeah, either or.
If probably. So yeah, I guess it depends on if you think there are states of affairs.
Yeah.
If you don't, it's a maximal, consistent set of propositions.
I think it's both, and I don't think either exists.
Yeah, same.
Yay! We're going to convert everybody one day. Okay, I like this second highlighting thing because he actually gets to basic ethical facts here. You highlight, I am committed to the obtaining of substantive, metaphysically necessary brute facts. Okay, we're going to get into brute because that's key. Some ethical facts fall into this category. I call such facts basic ethical facts. Such facts are the foundation of the rest of objective morality and rest on no foundation themselves. To ask of such facts, where do they come from, or on what foundation do they rest, is misguided in much the way that, according to us, many theists, it is misguided to ask God, where did God come from? Or on what foundation does God rest? The answer is the same in both cases. They come from nowhere, and nothing external to themselves grounds their existence. Rather, they are fundamental features of the universe that ground other truths. So again, remember what we said before? We end with God, and then if you say, where did God come from? No, he doesn't come from anywhere. He's necessary. He explains everything. Wielenberg is going to go down a notch, and he's going to go to abstract objects, basic ethical facts. And this is the thing he's going to say, okay, where do those come from? That doesn't make sense to ask that question. So to go back to the moral argument, objective moral values exist only if God exists. Wielenberg disagrees with that because he thinks that objective moral values are constituted by these basic ethical facts, these brute facts. You don't need to go for an external explanation for basic ethical facts, just like you don't need an external explanation for God being the good. So what gives, Chris? Why does he stop here?
He thinks it's sufficient without positing God, basically. And I mean, if you took God apart into pieces, then a lot of those things would explain a lot of the things around us. It's really not surprising.
Shopping list.
It's not really not surprising if you take God's character and separate it from Him, and then say, "Hey, this explains morality." Yeah, of course it does. That's what we said, but it was in a person, right? Yeah, that's just basically kind of all there is to it. I don't think it does sufficiently, obviously, explain morality. And I could probably say at this point that the primary objection, or I think one of the best objections, at least that I have to non-theistic meta-ethics, is an authority problem.
Authority.
Like the authority, the best that there's really only two options. You can either say, well, actually, there's more than that, but you could basically say there is no authority problem because morality doesn't need authority, which I think is absurd. Or you could say there is authority, but it's rational authority, which is in the end makes it so that you have to reduce moral oughts to rational oughts, which robust realists do sometimes. Christopher Landau does it. That's exactly what he does.
Mm-hmm.
That's what humor does.
And then for the audience, let's define rational and moral oughts.
Yeah. So a rational ought, but they're both normative oughts. So
normative, right.
So normative statements or propositions are statements or propositions about what ought to be the case.
What ought to be the case, yep.
Right. And so when you talk about moral oughts, it's saying what ought to be the case in a moral sense. When you say rational oughts, to say what should be the case in a rational sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they're not, and they are very clearly not the same thing. And actually, now that I think about it, I think I confused two people. I haven't actually seen Christopher Landau do this before. I've seen Humer do this before. In fact, Michael Humer is the only person I've ever seen to actually tackle the authority question, and the way he handles it is by reducing moral oughts to rational oughts.
How does that help?
So, well, it gives
How
it
does
some.
That help?
Yeah, it gives it some authority, but that's the best they can do. The only authority. So, and here's the authority it gives you. So, say you violate what we would typically say is a moral ought or a moral obligation,
mm-hmm.
right? And we put you in jail, and it's bad enough to where we literally execute you.
Mm-hmm.
He would have to say that the reason we executed you not because you were not because you were immoral, but because you were irrational, right? Right. Yeah,
murdering somebody is like getting a math problem wrong. You forgot to carry the one.
Yeah. In the worst way. It's like saying these aren't numbers and throwing the paper at your teacher or something. Like it doesn't do morality justice. So Wielenberg comes very close to doing the same. A lot of robust realists come very close, like to doing this, but nobody really comes outright and says that except for Humer. Hume was very clear. Remember, we were talking about. He even says that, say you saw a woman being mugged or even raped in front of you, if you think there's anywhere a remotely decent chance that you could die by saving her or by trying to save her or whatever, then you have no moral obligation to save her. You can just let it happen.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You just let it happen. And you know what? I think I would agree with him on atheism. If atheism were true, yeah, absolutely, because your death means most likely your annihilation. And you're
it
never
does mean that people will honor what you did for about 40 years. That's worth
I don't
it, right?
care. I don't care about other people's honor. I just like it. I'm not morally obligated, so it might be supererogatory. Let's just say that. But you'd never be morally obligated to go against your ultimate self-interest. That's the point. Everybody that I know of in ethics or metaethics agrees with that. That's just so obvious. But if your view reduces to, say, you not having to save a woman being mugged, maybe even to death, because it's going to go against your ultimate self-interest, I think we all have a very strong seeming or intuition, a philosophical intuition.
Feeling?
No, that you should save her, right? And on non-theistic metaethics, it's not entirely the case. In fact, I've actually argued even further than that. I think that supererogatory actions that require that have self-sacrifice, I think that's irrational. I do, in 99% of cases on atheism. Right? And if you're an atheist, you sacrifice your life for somebody else. Yeah, that seems pretty irrational to me. You haven't thought it through. You're operating on feeling. And there's just very few cases in which it would make any sense. So Wielenberg will clearly disagree with me here, especially in his book Virtue, Value, and a Godless World, where he says it's one of the most admirable things you can do. He even thinks it's more admirable because of what you're giving up compared to theism.
Right.
I think it's the exact opposite. I think the fact that you're giving that much up is stupid. You shouldn't be given that much
up. That's along the same lines as when people say that when we're not immortal, it makes life even more precious. So if you're willing to like give up your life, knowing that this is all you have, that makes it even more honorable, more worth.
Yeah.
But if you're immortal, I mean, what kind of bravery is that? You're just going to get killed and you're going to go in the afterlife, and why should you get any laurels for that?
Yeah,
so if they're the brave ones.
Right. Well, yeah. If somebody's about to be tortured, say I take their place, I sacrifice something. Okay, I'm being tortured to death. Like that's something. And then I'm dying. Right. Even if I do continue to exist in the afterlife. But even under it's analogous to for theists, if I were to go to hell in somebody's place.
Whew.
Nobody is not only not obligated to, that is irrational, and you should that is a we can say, Paul says this about some people, right? That he kind of sacrifices salvation
Romans
or something.
9.
Yeah,
I wish myself were accursed.
Right. But that was more of an expression. Yeah, right. That was more of an expression of love than it is something that he's either morally obligated to do, which he isn't. And it's not even supererogatory. I don't even think it's that. I don't think it's going above and beyond the call of duty. Well, for two reasons. First of all, it's irrational, and supererogatory actions are not rational. And the second thing is, notice what a supererogatory action is: going above and beyond something else. There's a threshold there. If the threshold's not there, you're not going above and beyond anything, right? Right.
Supererogatory actions presuppose duties.
Yeah, and you don't have anywhere near a duty to sacrifice your ultimate self-interest, and not even just. And I say nowhere near for a reason. Like there are other instances in which say I don't have a duty to do something, but I do it, and it's above what I was asked of me.
Right.
But the above is still there. Because it means there's something asked of me.
Like on like a human analogy, I could say, Chris, clean your room. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I gave you this checklist. Vacuum the floors, make your bed, pick up your toys, put your philosophy books in alphabetical order, please. And then I come back in an hour, and you did all of that, and you waxed your walls, you put air freshener in the air, you dusted everything, you went beyond the call of my command. And that is praiseworthy. But it presupposed I gave you a checklist in the first place. So you couldn't go
Yeah.
beyond the call of duty with me telling me to clean your room if I didn't give you the checklist in the first place.
Yeah. And it would even be there even if you didn't command me to do it. If you just said, it'd be nice if you did,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
and then I found a checklist of what you use to clean your own room,
Yeah.
right? There's no obligation there at all.
Yeah.
But there is still a supererogatory action, which is cleaning my own room, maybe even yours.
You just did it
but
better than me to make yourself look better than me. But
yeah. But that's not even present. I don't even think when it comes to that's just not present when it comes to self-sacrifice. Like you're just everybody agrees you're not morally obligated to sacrifice your ultimate self-interest, and that's kind of the point. And the more scenarios in which you reduce what you have to do because it messes with your ultimate self-interest, I think the less likely your meta-ethics is.
Right. And again, this is all for the audience. This is all relating back to a flaw with Wielenberg's decision to ground values and duties in abstract objects which have no authority whatsoever. And
Right.
I'm even reading, I just pulled it up, Ethics Discovering Right and Wrong by Louis Poyman, and he's got this section in chapter 1 called Traits of Moral Principles. He's got prescriptivity, which is action guiding, universalizability, it's got to apply to everybody in relevantly similar situations. He's got publicity, you got to be able to make it public in order to guide action optimally. Practicability, you got to be able to do it. Ought implies can. And then he's got overridingness. And he says moral principles have predominant authority and override other kinds of principles. They are not the only principles, but they also take precedence over other considerations, including aesthetic, prudential, and legal principles. So you brought up self-interest, right? That would be like prudential. There's things that you might be called to do. It might be your duty to go against your self-interest. It might go against just plain prudence of driving on the right-hand part of the highway. Is prudent, right?
Yeah.
But you might have a moral obligation not to do that in order to get your wife to the hospital if she's experiencing internal bleeding or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
First example that popped in my mind. But yeah, so he calls it overridingness. That's just another way of saying authority. And abstract objects just don't have that. I don't see a way for an abstract object to exemplify or ground or explain the kind of authority that we experience that we have in our own lives when we have duties.
Yeah.
And
right. So the
promote values.
The best. So I said that the best they can do is like rational authority. I don't think they can even do that. But there's a long.
Seem authoritative.
Well, right? So if there are normative propositions out there that are true, many of them are going to be rational. Right. So there's going to be a fact of the matter as to whether you're being rational or irrational. And that's all you really need for rational authority. But it's not enough. It's not even close to enough.
Necessary, but not sufficient.
Right. Because morality is a fully rational project. Right. And analogy, and I've probably given this before on the YouTube podcast, but it's kind of like if anybody's heard Jordan Peterson give this analogy. He had a dream.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, he had a dream that he woke up in a church. He just kind of woke up.
I love this story.
Yeah, he sort of woke up on the floor, and there's there instead of pews being where they're supposed to be, there's just graves kind of all over where the congregation sits.
Yes. And
there's a special grave up where the altar is, and then he kind of looks around for a second and notices there's names on these graves. And they're the names of the great warrior kings of the past. So that's kind of how he says it. men of authority, right? And he then he eventually they start rising out of their graves, and they look around and they notice each other, and since they were warrior types, they start fighting. And the special grave up there, eventually someone started raising out of that grave, and he calls it the Christ figure, right?
Right.
And they stop fighting and bow their knee, and the whole point to that is there's no sufficient authority for you to bow your knee to. Then there's no reason to think that you ought to stop fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 4 different things you can put in the place up there that correspond to the places you can conceive of authority being when it comes to morality. There's obviously below us, at our level, and above us, and there's 2 different forms at above us that you could take that we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
But below us, well, if the authority of morality is below us, it does nothing. There's no way in which we ought to behave. Right? It has no authority over us, or even at our level.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Wouldn't even really have much rational authority. Then at least rational authority is somewhat at least at our level. There's a fact of the matter whether you're being rational or irrational. If it's at our level, then that means I still have the authority to just disagree with it. I could just say, no, I don't care what you say I ought to do. I reject your authority, and I have the authority to do that. It's at our level, right? And this is one of the main problems when it comes to ethical naturalism. And then you have the authority being above us, sort of above and beyond us, and that's ethical non-naturalism, which Wielenberg's is one. So robust realism is a form of ethical non-naturalism.
Mm-hmm.
And one example of, say, the authority of morality being below us is, just say you come across, or instead of Christ being Christ up there at the altar, you just see like a golden slab of rules. Like it's just a gold.
Scary.
It's a golden slab, and it has rules written on it. Like.
Right.
And maybe so many that you have to use a magnifying glass to see it or something. So should the warrior king stop fighting because of that golden slab? Probably not. They'd probably start fighting over the golden slab. It's gold. Right. At our level would be like another warrior king, and he'd probably start fighting. And then you have the 2 things above us. Let's say it's what Wielenberg says it is. Let's say it's a non-natural slab of rules.
Non-natural, right?
It's a non-natural. Instead of a slab of like a physical thing, it's just a set of rules.
Yeah.
And them knowing that, does that mean that they ought to stop fighting? No, there's no authority in that at all. Just some disconnected list of rules does nothing.
Why should I stop fighting? Because the immaterial rule says so.
That's so right. The salient point is that authority really only comes from persons, and ultimate moral authority comes from a specific person, one that has intrinsic, infinite moral authority. That's what we call God, right? And this is, I think, one of the biggest problems. This is probably, I would say, maybe even the thing that would keep, if I were an atheist, that would keep me from accepting morality altogether. And this is the sense that one of the only senses really that I don't blame Cosmic Skeptic and T-Jump for denying morality, because this is such a huge problem. It's no wonder. And there you go. That's all I got to say on that.
No, I mean, that's true. And maybe, as I remember Craig's argument, objective moral values and duties exist only if God exists. You could probably like rephrase that a little bit to take into account authority, because it seems like Wielenberg might take care of existence, which I don't think he does, but let's say he does. Then you could just rephrase the first premise as overriding or authoritatively sufficient objective moral principles bind us or obligate us sufficiently only if God exists, or something like that. You could probably make another kind of argument for God's existence on the basis of that property of authoritativeness, instead of just their mere existence. Even though you could probably just semantically unpack that from the very notion of duties, but
duties, and just look at the way that people describe duties, no matter what view they adopt. I mean, maybe unless they're like anti-realists, they'll say they'll call them requirements, right? Schroeder calls them directions. Like he literally calls them directions. So requirements, directions, um, just obligations, obviously, like the kind of things that they call them, um, only come from persons. Directions just kind of existing out there. No one wrote them. They'll call it moral law, right? Laws, come from lawmakers.
Well, remember
Right? So
that story I told you
Mhm.
when I was in the Air Force and I came to my computer and there was a kind of crumbled up piece of paper on my desk and
Yeah.
it had some things to do on it, but it was like sloppy handwriting and I thought it came from one of my airman friends or something, just kind of being funny. And the whole
Mhm.
day went by. I ended up throwing it away. And then my flight chief comes up to me, "Did you do those rules or those tasks that your commander put on your desk this morning? They're due in about a half hour." What?
Yeah.
So the whole like authoritativeness of that list of tasks completely transformed when I thought about where that list came from, the person that it came from, the commander. It came from the commander, and the
Yeah.
weightiness of the obligations and the duties that attach to that thing I threw in the trash can just increased exponentially. I'm like, crap, I'm going to be in trouble. But because I
Yeah.
thought it came from an airman initially, who has no authority over me whatsoever,
Yeah.
I made a rash decision to throw it away.
It's you have authority maybe at your level,
Right.
which who cares,
Who
right?
cares? Exactly.
Or if it was, it maybe what if the computer printed it out randomly,
Right.
or
Prank.
what if it was stapled to the roof and you knew it was, and you actually knew what it says? Who cares?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I think the most authority you could possibly squeeze out of it is the kind of authority, I guess, that you would first need to have to acknowledge. Um, and it's at great cost to you, therefore, because of the value you attach to whatever the rule is telling you. So, for example, like with legality, like I don't want to kill somebody because I don't want the death penalty or I don't
right.
want to go to jail or whatever. And because that legislation comes from the federal government, they have the power to impose upon you force, and that is something you find distasteful, and it
Mm,
scares you, and you don't want to go to jail, you don't want to get the death penalty, so that forms some kind of legally circumscribed kind of obligation maybe on a certain level, but
yeah.
it wouldn't have the kind of overridingness a moral principle would have, where even
Right.
if the federal government has the threat of force that it can impose on you if you go against it, like Nazi Germany or something like that, the moral
Yep.
principle would have even more authority than the legal principle. But if you
Yep.
don't believe in morality, all you got really is like different collections of government that can threaten you with not doing something. And if you don't, you better not do it, or you're gonna get the consequences. You're gonna go to Siberia and chop ice for the rest of your life. But that's about it. That's the only kind of obligations I think that they could get from it, which wouldn't cohere with our intuitions about the
Yeah.
authority of moral values if your moral sense hasn't decayed over time. If you if if you haven't underwent what C.S. Lewis calls the abolition of man, the men without chests. But
Mhm.
so long as that's there, then you're borrowing from moral capital, and
Yeah.
that's going to involve authoritativeness. So this is a big weakness we see in Wielenberg's construal of moral values and duties just merely being abstract objects, the least scariest thing of all time. They can't cause anything. They're outside of space time. Why on earth would we attach any kind of authority to abstracta? I can't think of a reason.
No, no, me neither. Like the only authority would be very, very far. So I mean, like rational. But other than that, the authority I would attach to it would lead to God,
And
right? Because
authority
that
isn't discussed in this essay, is it?
no, I don't. So far as I remember, Willenberg never discusses authority in
Never
anything he's
does.
written.
It was just David Enoch, right? That attached to
No,
the
no, it's
rationality.
just it was humor.
Michael Humer, sorry.
Humor is the only one that I know of at all that has discussed moral authority.
Because the only objection, to kind of move on here, um, the only objections that I see Wielenberg making is that whatever we say to Wielenberg about whatever things we see wrong in his view, he turns the tables on us and says, I could say the same thing back to you.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, because our view involves a more complicated metaphysic, am I remembering this right? For parsimony's sake, we should just stick with. Was that the other essay we read? I can't remember.
So David Kaloran says this. He thinks robust realism is more parsimonious um, than
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right. My bad.
theism. But Willenberg does say that he thinks his view is less arbitrary in its stopping point than ours.
That's right. So on the one hand, he says every single objection you could launch against my view, I can turn the tables around and say your view suffers the same problem. So why are you giving me these objections if you guys are stuck with the same problem? We'll get to that in just a second. And then secondly, he says we're both saying this. We're saying that ours is the least arbitrary explanatory stopping point. And then he says, no, mine is the least arbitrary explanatory stopping point. So let's take those in order. So I don't want to go over every single thing he said as far as,
Right.
You're saying it about me. You're going over the same thing, but I do want to just maybe emphasize one thing. I apologize to everybody out there. I got something I have to do after this, so I can't go as long as we did last time. My bad. Sorry. But let me scroll up here, actually. Yeah, I wanted to read this. So this is the part where we say that I think he calls it, I think he's saying that we say that his view is committed to unexplained, non-trivial brute facts. And is the use of non-trivial kind of synonymous with what you're saying with synthetic?
So basically in this article he uses non-trivial and then applies it to Wainwright, but Wainwright was talking about synthetic. Right? So he was saying Willenberg was saying trivial versus non-trivial, and Wainwright was focusing on synthetic and analytic.
Okay, my bad. So I wanted to relate it to this thing right here, basic ethical facts. So we're saying that Wielenberg, like, I guess he might have them in a sense, but we think that he needs to provide an external explanation for his brute basic ethical facts, metaphysically necessary ethical facts.
Mm-hmm.
And we're saying that that's a bad thing. And then Wielenberg says, no, we got the same thing. We got the same problem. And he brings up Adams's view here. And he says that even if you do say God equals the good, right? I'm not going to bring up everything that he says right here, but he says that we're committed to basic ethical facts too, that are unexplained, that lack an external explanation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he says Adam's view commits him to the existence of basic ethical facts. In my sense, ethical facts that are substantive, metaphysically necessary, and brute. Among such facts are the following. Okay, here we go. That the good exists. Pause. Is that an ethical fact?
Well, so regardless of whether it is, so this is the thing I like to say.
Okay, good.
Initially, like he would give facts that I just did not think were ethical facts.
That's what I thought too. Even in the book.
Yeah. But like, even if, regardless, I don't have to argue that at all. Whatever facts they are, right? That is an identity statement, right? It's analytic. It's not synthetic.
Well, he assumes it's not analytic. Do you see that up here? With water equals H2O?
Yeah.
The meaning of the term does not always reveal the full nature of the thing to which the term refers. That assumes it's not analytic, because if it were analytic, it could tell you the nature too, right?
Well, no, so far as you understand the nature of the constituent concepts, and that tells you whether it's true or false, That's enough for it to be analytic.
Right. Yeah.
Right,
My
right.
bad.
So
Okay.
if I understood one of the constituent concepts is God. Once you understand God, like what God must be,
He is the
uh,
good.
right, then we'll see that that proposition is analytically true.
Right.
And so all the propositions that we know of. So don't even talk about moral propositions yet. All the propositions we know of that are synthetic require an explanation beyond themselves.
Right.
Right. Now we get to moral propositions, and all of a sudden, they don't require explanations beyond themselves, even though they're synthetic.
Well, they
Right.
don't always apply. They just don't apply here, Chris.
Right. So that's the mysterious and suspicious part of this. All of a sudden,
How else is his theory going to work, Chris? Could cut him some slack.
So what I would want here, I guess, is a non-moral synthetic truth that doesn't have that doesn't have an explanation of its truth or its existence beyond itself. That's what I want.
Well, that's what he thinks he has, right? In calling it brute.
No, non-moral.
Non-moral. Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Right. I want a non-moral synthetic truth that does not need an explanation beyond itself.
Well, abstract objects are non-moral.
Although they need an explanation beyond themselves.
Yes.
That's part of the argument.
That's
right?
part of the argument. So,
yeah.
For everybody in the audience, do you see what we did there? Chris wants a non-moral external explanation of the brute or these basic ethical facts, right? And then I said abstract object, that's not moral. Now, Wielenberg doesn't want to go any further than that. We think that he does. And part of his argument is going to be he doesn't need to because we don't need to with God. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the reason. And he's a Platonist, and Platonists don't think there is an extra reason, but we think there is. That'll be another video, though. That gets complicated. So, among such facts are the following: that the good exists. So, you don't even care. You could just dispose of what I said and just say, is that an ethical fact? A brute ethical fact? It just seems like a metaphysical fact about an ethical fact.
Right, so meta-ethical.
Meta-ethical, right, exactly. And then you're saying that, what were you saying now? If you dispense with even my root, you're saying what?
Yeah, I'm saying I don't care what kind of fact it is per se. I care whether
it's grounded in something non-natural.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I care what its relationship is to his facts. And it does have a relationship. You know, if it exists, if it's a necessarily true, kind of a basic necessary truth, right? That doesn't have an explanation beyond itself. But the reason it doesn't is different, right, than what we would typically call what many theists would say are ethical facts. And it's different because that is analytic, whereas the base ethical facts he refers to are synthetic. And synthetic, so far as we know, synthetic truths require explanations beyond themselves. Synthetic truths are things that are not propositions that are not true in virtue of their terms or the constituent concepts, right? And that's many moral truths. In fact, all moral truths on atheism. And so what I would like is a non-moral synthetic truth that has no explanation beyond itself, so that I can see what that would look like outside of the moral realm that he posits, the Platonic realm. But he hasn't given any so far as I can tell, because I'm not sure there are any. I kind of think you could maybe call it part of what, the taxi cab fallacy that people usually apply to the universe. The universe just has no cause, everything in it. And he kind of somewhat does the same thing when it comes to explanation concerning moral propositions. Everything else has an explanation except for certain moral propositions.
And would you say God is the good, and you want something that's non-moral, but is just the good non-moral? Did I read you right?
So when you talk about the good, when we refer to God as the good,
right,
that's referring to God's moral aspects,
right.
But it's doing so in a way of identity, which is a meta-ethical fact.
Meta-ethical fact. Okay, gotcha. So that's non-moral then. It's meta-ethical.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
All of these things seem meta-ethical. The good is loving. The good is merciful. These don't seem ethical. They just seem meta-ethical.
Yeah,
That the
right.
good is
And
loving. That the good is merciful.
my concern is just taking our two supposed shopping lists and comparing them, and which one seems um, less arbitrary. Uh, I think his is a lot more arbitrary because there are various aspects of certain abstract objects that we have a very good explanation for that he just doesn't partake in. He just stops and says they're brute.
And they're
And I
not
think that's
consolidated in one spot. We're consolidating it in one person.
in one person, right? Um,
They're
and
just kind of
the thing
floating
is,
out there.
it's not just that we do that; we have to do that when it comes to certain things. So, for like one of the biggest arguments against Platonism, say specifically those who believe in certain propositions, are that they are intentional. They're about other things,
Mm-hmm.
and intrinsically intentional states are only found in a mind. They don't make sense outside of a mind.
Mm-hmm.
Rocks aren't intentional; they're not about anything, and trees aren't, and lists of rules, whether they're natural or non-natural, aren't about anything else intrinsically, even if they are derivatively, right? But if they're derivative, it must be from something else. And the only thing we know that could give that kind of intentionality are minds. I literally can't make sense of propositions without an infinite mind.
Let's go over this objection real quick and then move on to section 4 real quick, which is mysterious floating values. I like that.
Yeah.
So right here, he says, it might be thought that Adam's theory does provide a foundation for such ethical facts. Doesn't the theory tell us, for instance, that the fact that the good exists is grounded in the fact that God exists? The answer is no, since the good just is God. The existence of God can hardly explain or ground the existence of the good. Right, it's identity. In the context of Adam's view, the claim that God serves as the foundation of the good is no more sensible than the claim that H2O serves as the foundation of water. Indeed, once we see that on Adam's view, the good equals God, we see that Adam's theory entails that the good has no external foundation, since God has no external foundation. It is not merely that Adam's view fails to specify where the good came from. The theory implies that the good did not come from anywhere. So, keeping that in mind, he says, I'm trying to highlight that identity statement because I'm trying to get clear on what he's saying about the fact, about what these additional brute facts that just kind of spit out there when we say that God is the good. Like, doesn't he say, like, that assumes another ethical fact or another fact, a brute fact, that there's a feature about God that makes him identical with the good or something like that? Is this another wrinkle in the carpet kind of thing he's trying to do?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think so. I
Where
mean,
was
if
that at actually? I actually wanted to read that part. Feature. He says feature.
yeah.
Yeah, there it is. That God's nature has whatever mysterious features explains his existence. The presence of this remarkable property in the divine nature appears to lack an explanation. Perhaps it will be suggested that the same feature of God that explains his existence also explains his possession of that very feature, in which case this feature explains its own presence in the divine nature. Even if this makes sense, it still implies that the fact that God has the feature in question is a brute fact, since that it is included in the divine nature is not explained by a distinct state of affairs. So I want to address that really quick. So it seems like our metaphysics could accommodate whatever brute facts he wants to spit out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a fact, but I don't understand how it would be brute if we said that God's nature has whatever mysterious features explains his existence. Okay, then why does that imply that there's some kind of fact out there that's assumed by that sentence I just said that wouldn't be encompassed by. Why would it lack an explanation? It wouldn't lack an explanation in this context because it's assumed when I say that God's nature has whatever mysterious features explains its existence. It kind of spits out right there. But why does that
Mhm.
imply that theism doesn't have the resources to accommodate that fact as well? Why the jump to just it's unexplained in this context, therefore it's unexplained for theists and for the resources that are at theism's disposal to account for every fact.
Yeah.
I,
Uh,
I, I didn't see how that
yeah.
followed at all, and
Well,
that was the
so
strongest part that I could see.
so I mean, let's say even that. Let's just even say that God is the good or something is is a brute fact, um, which I think it is. It's going to be that way for a different reason, either because it is analytic or it's based on other more fundamental truths that are analytic themselves. The problem with Wielenberg's Platonism is that the very foundation of morality for him is synthetic, like the foundation. It's not analytic, right? But on theism, it is analytic,
Mm-hmm.
and analytic truths don't require explanations beyond themselves, right? So yeah, in his sense, they would be brute. But what I'm saying is, his synthetic moral truths cannot be brute because they're synthetic.
Okay, they're not brute, but he explains them in terms of abstract objects, which are brute, and so you
Those are
don't.
the truths.
Those are the truths. Okay.
Yeah, they
Why
themselves
does he
are
call them
synthetic.
brute? Why does he call them brute and they're synthetic? Doesn't make sense.
Well, because he doesn't remember, because he doesn't think that all synthetic truths require an explanation beyond themselves.
That's right. Okay. And we're
Yeah,
disagreeing with him there. Okay. Every
yeah,
synthetic truth needs an explanation beyond
yeah,
itself, and Wielenberg just arbitrarily chooses this particular part of his theory to
yeah,
say that this is just the one time where synthetic truths don't need an external explanation, and we're like, foul.
yeah, yeah.
Lord,
And
why?
that's
Why
the
are you saying
sense,
that?
right? That's the sense in which it's sort of an arbitrary shopping list, like Craig or others say. Now, like what would satisfy me more, I guess, is if, again, he came up with a non moral synthetic truth that did not require an explanation beyond itself. And
Mm-hmm.
because he doesn't do that, he just says perhaps not all synthetic truths need explanations beyond themselves. And he stops at that. And the only place he ever says that, if I remember right, is this article. This is the only time he ever says that. He just stops. He never takes care of it again.
Right. So this sentence right here, Chris, this one right here, is false.
Yeah.
It is just false. It is assumed when I say this, right? But I just don't see the jump from it being unexplained just in this context to it being unexplained in the whole, as far as all the
Well,
resources at theism's disposal to
yeah.
explain facts.
So if I remember, I can't remember exactly where it is in this paper. Um, he doesn't. He's not even sure that the principle of sufficient reason is correct because he's not sure internal explanations make any sense. Right. So God exists by a necessity of his own nature. That is the explanation. Right. But he's not sure that makes sense because he's not sure there are internal explanations. Um, Yeah, I mean that would be why he thinks there would be no explanation, I guess. Um, but I mean that would, but again, that's not really a problem if he believes in these abstract entities, because they have no external explanation. It means they have no explanation at all,
Mm-hmm. They're
right?
brute,
And even worse, not
simply
just no
brute.
explanation, they're synthetic, right? And that's the whole point.
We
They're
can,
synthetic truths.
yeah, basically what we just said, we can kind of bypass section 4
Mm-hmm.
because that just comes up again. He
Yep.
he says at the very end he says it uh, it turns out that Adams, Craig, Moreland, and I are all committed to the existence of basic ethical facts. If this is right, then none of us can reasonably criticize the approach of the other on the grounds that it posits values with no external foundation. That's just false. He
Mm-hmm.
provides values with no external foundation arbitrarily, and they're synthetic. We have analytic stuff, and
Yeah.
his reasons for thinking that we have basic ethical facts. It seems like an inference from just like a local point he's making rather than considering the resources of theism generally. So I think
Mm-hmm.
we can just skip that. But the gist of that section was is just Craig was just didn't understand what it meant for just justice to exist. And he's trying to cash that out, I guess, in terms of the state of affairs of being just, or the
Yeah.
property of justice when moral agents are just and that property is instantiated within the state of affairs of that moral agent acting justly or something like that. Um, no.
Right.
That runs into the same problems we already brought up.
Yep.
But that's basically it. Craig's just kind of confused. How can just justice exist? It just seems like it's a property of persons. And we have a person in our ontology, and Wielenberg doesn't. He does have us, which would instantiate the property, but like what he says here, if I could find it real quick. Remember, we talked about this before. Where was that at? I gotta have these ready. I'm gonna take notes next time. Yeah. On my view, among the entities that just exist are states of affairs and properties. Like Plantinga, with respect to justice, my view is that there are various obtaining states of affairs concerning justice, and that when individual people have the property of being just, it is in part in virtue of the obtaining of some of these states of affairs. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, I hold that it is just to give people what they deserve. Thus, anyone who gives others what they deserve thereby instantiates the property of justice. This just seems to just beg the question against Craig. That's his point.
Yeah.
He's saying that's
Well,
weird. That's weird for justice just wait out there for it to be instantiated.
you know what the funny thing is about what he says there about how Plantinga understands these entities,
Yes.
right? Is he does not understand these entities in the way Plantinga does.
Right, because
Plantinga
Planning is a
is,
theist.
huh?
Because Planning is a theist.
But not only that, a conceptualist.
And a conceptualist, exactly.
Yeah, he's a conceptualist.
Concepts have causal powers, abstract objects don't.
Yeah, and he's a conceptualist also that moral propositions are thoughts. They're the thoughts of God,
They're the
right?
thoughts of God.
In
Exactly.
fact, I mean, a lot of people are like conceptualists like this. You know, Greg Welty, Stephen Parrish, Aquinas, Augustine, like Lorraine Keller. Uh, he even said at one point that there's no real Platonist or namely realist. He was talking about Platonism, just being a realist. So no real Platonist besides Plato before Frege thought that propositions could exist without mental activity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That and it's the same thing for the church fathers too. Like divine conceptualism has been actually the majority of view until recently.
Well, we're going to stop here. There's a lot to go. I wanted to get to the shopping list. Dang it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
we could do a part two.
we could do a part two. Let's do a part two because I felt like I was rushing through this a little bit because of the stuff I got to do after this is over.
Yeah.
Um,
So we can do a part two. We could finish this article and maybe go into the David Kaloran one.
yes.
If we have time.
And just as an announcement, we're going to try and get on Dr. Bruce Gordon for the next guy we're going to bring on. That should have been this time, but we didn't get anybody because they're really hard to get, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll continue this in a part two, I think, just to do Wielenberg justice. We'll go
Yeah,
over the
and we'll get some
shopping
more
list
time to get
approach.
Gordon.
Oh, no, it won't. He knows me.
Yeah.
Just kidding. I'm just gonna peruse through this. Rights and duties without God. That's another one I want to go over.
Yeah, that's a huge one. The authority issue is almost, or not just almost, it's always in the context of duties, of moral obligations. That is considered like robust realism is mainly non-theistic meta-ethicist biggest problem.
Yeah.
And in duties, the biggest problem is authority. So
That sounds good. And yeah. Hey, like I say at the end of every one of these, I look forward to uploading more and more MJ's Corner videos with just me in it, because I've got a billion so far. Sorry. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. All right, I'm gonna call it MJ's Corner. So these are my random thoughts about whatever comes up in my mind, whatever I want to talk about, and Chris doesn't get to boss me around.
yeah, yep,
I get to be wrong anytime I want.
yep,
All
yep.
right, I love you guys. Sorry this had to be cut short. We want to do the. I like doing the 2 hour ones, but yeah, today stinks.
Yeah, I,
It's about an hour and
I'll
15 minutes. That's not bad.
I'll go ahead and end by just saying that if you're a non-theist,
Uh-oh. Put down the
no,
hammer.
this is not a no. If you're a non-theist, what he has on the screen, what you had on the screen there, uh, robust realism. Actually, you can't see it because it's an OBS, but the robust realism book, and generally robust realism, is for I think the best meta-ethical view on the market of ideas, specifically non-theistic. Right? If you want any chance at all of having morality without God, that is where you should be looking, specifically at Wielenberg and Enoch, and those are like kind of like the two, especially Enoch. He's kind of the standard today, I think.
Yeah. So you got David Enoch, Erik Wielenberg,
Michael Huemer,
Michael Huemer,
Russ Schiffer Landau, and David Kaloran.
Yeah. And then light Derek Parfit. He's kind of a realist, right?
You could take everything you want from Derek Parfit, and it would be very good for robust realism, except one thing: he denies the existence of all abstract objects. but he still speaks of them like a lot of us do, even though we don't believe they exist. Right?
Yeah, he deflates existential consequence.
Yeah,
and retains objective truth.
He takes a lightweight.
We have a person in our ontology. He doesn't.
But yeah, he takes a lightweight Platonist view, which just don't worry about it because it doesn't make sense.
It's lightweight.
It's lightweight. It's a lightweight. Yeah. So yeah, Derek Parfit would be another really, really good source. He has a massive three volume set. He just doesn't stop writing.
All right, folks. That was kind of quick. We're going to do a sequel. I'm going to go slower. And I'm going to have a lot more to say about this too. Because I want to do this essay justice. Erik Wielenberg is one of the better critics of Christian philosophy of religion. So that's why a lot of people are kind of paying attention to what he has to say, because it's a substantive critique. Even if we disagree at the end of the day, he's still a great philosopher to read in terms of his own views and what he has to say about our views. And it's kind of a testimony about how people on both sides of the aisle can have a robust, substantive conversation without hurling insults and demeaning the other person and new atheist tactics and things like that. Yay!
Yeah, it's so much more interesting than trying to convince somebody that raping women isn't wrong. Right? Like seriously, I'm just not interested in talking to anti-realists. This is so much more substantive. Like I don't want to try to convince people that there's certain things that are wrong. They have a problem. I don't think I want to talk to them all that much.
We're gonna stop there. I saw the hammer move. All right, thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll try to upload these every Monday. Peace out.
Later.